Alright, what is an ontological argument? An ontological argument tries to use a priori and deductive pure reasoning to argue for the existence of the ultimate reality or a perfect being. So, in my view, an ontological argument can also be called an epistemological argument because it tries to find a unity between epistemology and ontology, or between mental world and physical world, or between subjectivity and objectivity, or between in understanding and in objectivity, in the objective world. Okay, so that's why this is an ontological argument from Arguing for God by Graham Oppy Watt, but I replaced the reality with objectivity in this argument because I think terms like reality, thing, being, perfection, these terms are completely neutral to ontology and epistemology. So it's wrong to say, oh, being is related to ontology, but I don't know, knowledge is about epistemology. No. Yes, knowledge is about epistemology, but the right counterpart for knowledge in the ontological realm might be like presence, or I don't know, times, spatial temporal presence, object, not being. Being is totally neutral to ontology and epistemology, and that's why we can use the term is for both of them. We can say concept is, I don't know, object is, presence is, consciousness is. What is this isness, or the common essence between everything? This isness or being is completely neutral. So that's why the ontological argument is valid and uses this neutral term to argue for the both domains. So let's start by analyzing its first premise. It says there is in the understanding at least a being than which no greater can be thought. So a simple person like me can assume that, yeah, I'm certain about my knowledge that there is like a perfect being with no limitation, and it is in my mind, and it's the greatest thing, and there's nothing bigger than it, there's nothing greater than it. So premise 2, if it is even in the understanding alone, it can be thought to be in objectivity as well. So if it's in my understanding alone, it's possible for it to be in the objective world. It's just the mere mathematical possibility shows that, yeah, it's just possible for an infinity to be present in the objective world, whatever that is. So premise 3, which would be greater? So which would be greater than the first premise? First premise said it's a being than which no greater. It's the greatest being, basically. It says there is a greatest being in my mind. But if it also exists in objectivity, that would be greater than what I thought was the greatest. So, which would lead to a contradiction. This implies that this being had already a presence in both understanding and objectivity. It's not just in understanding, because if it was only in understanding, it would lead to a contradiction that would, in which there would be something greater than the greatest, which is a mere contradiction. Therefore, there exists both in understanding and in objectivity a being than which no greater being can be thought. So, a perfect level for the mental world is my certainty, is the certainty about my knowledge of a perfect being, and the perfect being, a perfect level for a physical or objective presence would be its infinity. So perfection is in a mental world or in understanding can be also translated as certainty, and perfection in objective world can be translated as infinity. So Anselm is basically showing that perfection is a unity between certainty or a perfect level of mental world and infinity or a perfect level of the physical world. So, and let's systematize this argument like the following. Suppose that me with both an objective and a subjective aspect. My objective aspect is my body and I don't know, my interaction with the physical world, and my subjective aspect is my interaction with the mental world and meaning. Okay, so suppose 2 is me with both my objective and subjective presence, being. Okay, and suppose O is objectivity and S is subjectivity. perfection of subjectivity can be something that is greater than me, okay, greater than my subjective or mental aspect. So perfection is also the common essence of objectivity and subjectivity. We can say perfection in objectivity, perfection in subjectivity, so it's completely neutral to the both domains. This can be interpreted as objectivity equals subjectivity in their perfection, and therefore there exists a being in objectivity that is also greater than me. So if there is a perfection in my understanding which is greater than me, and that perfection in my understanding is the same as a perfection in objectivity, this also means that there is a perfection in objectivity that is also greater than me, or than my objective presence. So let's go over the corollaries of this argument, two of which are indirect approaches to this argument, and the other two apparently are objections to this argument. So the first corollary has an ontologically indirect approach to the Anselm's argument. It says there is in the understanding at least a being than which no worse being can be thought. So worse can be interpreted as the smallest or the most finite, or I don't know, whatever you can imagine, whatever negative quality you can imagine in your mind. Okay. If it exists in the understanding and in objectivity, it can be thought to exist in the understanding alone. Okay? Which would be still worse. Okay. So, therefore, there does not exist in objectivity in a being than which no worse being can be thought. So it indirectly points to the Anselm's argument. It says by rejecting a presence in objectivity, that is the worst being, that is very weak. The extreme no-devil corollary, which I call it epistemologically indirect. This was ontologically indirect because it refutes a bad presence in objectivity, a weak presence in objectivity. The other one refutes bad being in epistemology or in mind. Okay, so the first premise says, suppose there is in the understanding at least a being than which no worse being can be thought. If it exists in the understanding, it is possible that it not exist in the understanding. Okay, which would be still worse. Therefore, there does not exist in the understanding a being than which no worse being can be thought. So, as we can see, it refutes a bad presence in mind. So the third corollary it's a parody. Actually, it's a parody by a monk towards Anselm. It says there is in the understanding at least an island than which no greater island can be thought. If it is in the understanding alone, it can be thought to be in objectivity as well, which would be greater. Therefore, there exists both in the understanding and in objectivity an island than which no greater island can be thought. So basically, this monk says to Anselm that if we use your argument, we can replace perfect being with whatever we want, and so that's why it's not valid. So I add a premise 5, which is objection to this objection to objection. So, and negative multiplied by negative equals positive. So why is this parody problematic? When you want to reduce an aspect of an argument to an analogy, like perfect being to island, you should concomitantly reduce all aspects of that argument to properties that are close to island. So you cannot just simply cherry pick one part of the argument and reduce it and retain the other parts. No, it's not valid. For example, when scientists give you an analogy of expanding universe, the metric expansion of universe with its stars, give you an analogy of this to a growing cake, or to a cake that is like becoming bigger with its raisins. They reduce the space to cake and reduce the stars to raisins. They don't just reduce the stars into raisins and retain the universe. No, that would be absurd. So they don't give you an analogy of like uh, raisins in the space or the stars in a cake. No, both the stars and the space were reduced to the raisins and the cake. So when you reduce the whole argument, when you reduce the whole argument, uh, when you retain the whole argument and reduce the perfect being to island, you should. It's not a valid thing to do, because your own objection is problematic. There is nothing wrong with the argument. So, for example, let us suppose that someone says 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a valid argument. Then he says, no, I can reduce one of these to 1 and say 1 plus 2 equals 4. You saw how my objection to this argument works? No, it's totally nonsensical. You should, if you reduce one of the 2's to 1, you should also reduce this other 2 to 1 and the result to 2, which would be 1 plus 1 equals 2 instead of 2 plus 2 equals 4. So you apply the reduction to the whole argument, not just cherry picking what you like perfect being into island. No, you should reduce all aspects to something that is immediately relevant to or has immediate properties with the island. So, for example, here's a valid analogy for that argument. There is, at least in my belief, a score than which no more probable a score can be believed. If it is in my belief alone, it can be observed to be my gotten score as well, which will be more probable. Therefore, there exists both in my belief and as my gotten score a score than which no more probable a score can be believed. So, what we did here, as we can see, we reduced in understanding of the Anselm's argument to belief. We reduced thought to observed. We reduced in objectivity or in reality to gotten score, and we reduced greater to more probable. So these are the qualities: more probable, belief, observed, gotten a score. These are the qualities that are immediately relevant to the score. You cannot just hold one, your favorite one, higher and reduce some parts of the argument. That only shows that your own objection is problematic. So let's move on to the fourth corollary, the devil corollary. It basically suggests that there is in the understanding at least a being than which no worse being can be thought. If it is even in the understanding alone, it can be thought to be in objectivity also, which would be still worse. Therefore, there exists both in understanding and in objectivity a being than which no worse being can be thought. Oh, it shows it has denied the Anselm's argument. Hooray! No. Again, this devil corollary is problematic. Premise 5. Objection to this objection. In this parody, the first and the third premises of the Anselm's argument have been made negative, but the second premise has remained unchanged. That's the nonsensical part. So the first premise has been made negative by replacing greater with worse. The second one has also been the second one, as you can see, has remained unchanged, and the third one has been changed by replacing greater with worse. So you cannot just cherry picking and changing whatever the premises of you want and then replacing. No, it's again it's not valid, and we are going to analyze why. So, for example, suppose that again someone replaces 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's a valid argument with minus 2 equals minus 4. This is the valid corollary to this argument. But someone might reduce like one of the 2's into negative and retain the other into positive and suggest, oh, you see, minus 2 plus 2 equals minus 4. Oh, I have denied this original argument. No, your own corollary is nonsensical and not valid. So let's go over Descartes' argument, Descartes' ontological argument. Descartes uses the concept of the mental world and physical world, objective world and subjective world. He basically suggests that although finite things might not correspond with their objective counterpart, but infinite or perfect things are necessarily united with their objective counterpart. So we're going to show this on a visual mind map. Here's the visual mind map. suppose that we have a finite idea of a sun, and we have no sun in our mind too, like the possibility of ignorance about sun. So if a finite idea of sun corresponds with the finite actual object of the sun in the physical world, that's called like perception and knowledge. We have knowledge of the sun and we are perceiving sun. If our no sun corresponds with, for example, at night there is no sun, corresponds with the no sun in the physical world, that would again be like perception and knowledge. I know that there is no sun. So this is when everything is good. Sun is the representative of a finite object, and the whole mental and the whole like this presence is the whole idea, the infinite idea is the uh, representative of perfection in mind, and also this whole infinite presence is the representative of perfection in physical or objective world, and a finite object is the representative of a finite like a finite thing in the physical world. So this is when everything is good. But someone might say, but there's not always a correspondence between these. Sometimes our idea of sun might be a delusion, or our idea of no sun might be just an ignorance of the actual presence, like the following. So here's the following. Here's when things get messy. I have an idea of sun in my mind in the mental world that corresponds to no sun. For example, it's night and I see sun in my mind. That's called delusion, when it does not correspond with its objective counterpart. Or I have an idea of no sun in my mind, which suppose it's day. Okay, it's during the day light. I have an idea of no sun and it corresponds with the actual sun. And I look at sun, I say there is no sun. That's called ignorance. So delusion and ignorance are caused by finite ideas. But a perfect, infinite idea, the whole thing here, cannot be delusional about a perfect presence. So although delusion and ignorance is possible for finite beings because of this possibility of lack of correspondence, but it's not possible for a perfect being, because in both of these cases, whether we are veridical about finite objects or we are delusional about them, a perfect presence cannot not cover a perfect idea cannot not cover a perfect presence. This is basically the essence of the Descartes argument. So that was for today, and we'll discuss it more later.